So pathway's different. It's not a masterclass telling you how to do it on the assumption that you don't know how to do it or you need to do it better. It's actually a more holistic view, which looks at your well-being, your motivation, your career aspirations, and of course, your CPD in some really engaging films and thought pieces and reflections. And that's what the Pathway program is about. It's about you. And that's not a self-indulgence. You matter. And the teachers and the students in front of you deserve the best version of you, just like your family does. We hope that with Pathway, you'll be able to keep motivated, hold on to your agency, and look after yourself. So Pathway's different. It's not a masterclass telling you how to do it on the assumption that you don't know how to do it or you need to do it better. It's actually a more holistic view, which looks at your well-being, your motivation, your career aspirations, and of course, your CPD in some really engaging films and thought pieces and reflections. And that's what the Pathway program is about. It's about you. And that's not a self-indulgence. You matter. And the teachers and the students in front of you deserve the best version of you, just like your family does. We hope that with Pathway, you'll be able to keep motivated, hold on to your agency, and look after yourself. So pathway is different. It's not a masterclass telling you how to do it on the assumption that you don't know how to do it or you need to do it better. It's actually a more holistic view, which looks at your well-being, your motivation, your career aspirations, and of course, your CPD in some really engaging films and thought pieces and reflections. And that's what the Pathway program is about. It's about you. And that's not a self-indulgence. You matter. And the teachers and the students in front of you deserve the best version of you, just like your family does. We hope that with Pathway, you'll be able to keep motivated, hold on to your agency, and look after yourself.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I can see we're setting things up behind the screen, behind the stages as we go along. So hopefully we'll get that up and running in just a moment. And welcome to the fifth of NHT's online CPD offerings. Hopefully we've got a full house. We've got lots of people subscribed, lots of people interested in learning state. This week we've got Stephen George, and he's presenting on going above and beyond in dealing with the media. Or media training, as it says there. As you can see from that slide that's there in front of us, Stephen is NHT's Head of Press and External Affairs. Stephen joined NHT in 2014 after 15 years working as a senior journalist with the BBC. His track record includes working on the BBC Radio 4, BBC World Service, the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, and including also some time on work experience on The Archers, where his claim to fame is he's appeared as a cow. So I'm sure he can tell you more about that as we go along. I think he was just a sound effect rather than anything else. He's also chair of governors at a single intake primary academy in Kent. Stephen's got 2 daughters, one's in junior school, one's in senior school. So he knows firsthand what it's like to be a parent. He's responsible for all of NHT's press activity. So if you see a press statement written, chances are that Stephen's inky fingers are all over it and will have written it. He also looks after members who find themselves in difficulty with the press, it says here. So no pressure there, Stephen. Enjoy that one. Hopefully you know what today's training is about. Its emphasis is on going above and beyond in how you deal with the local media and getting your story across in saying what you're doing and responding to the current crisis in these difficult times. Stephen will run through some golden rules, questions to ask yourself, some do's and don'ts, common mistakes, how to avoid them, getting your preparation right, and being successful examples to life. Before I bring Stephen on, I can see he's waiting in the wings there. Just some housekeeping rules. Your name will appear as a participant so people can see who you are. There's a Q&A. If you move your cursor at the bottom, you will see pop up a Q&A box, which will allow you to ask questions as we go along. And again, everyone will be able to see those. Make sure you direct your Q&A to all panelists and attendees, then we'll all be able to see it. As they go along, I'll let Stephen run his presentation, but I'll pick up the Q&A and I'll either answer them as we go along if they're straightforward, or put them to him at the end of the session. There's also a chat room that you can join in and talk along as we go along. And at the end, if people want to ask questions live and be heard, we can, if you raise a virtual hand, we can unmute you and you can join in that way. But we'll keep you on mute while Stephen's talking. Otherwise, there's just too many people and we'll all drown each other out. So I think that's probably all from me. So without further ado, I'll put you over to Stephen and hopefully he can take it up from there. So Stephen, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Andy, for that introduction. It's true. Those of you who are old enough to remember the BBC in the Midlands, once upon a time there was a place called Pebble Mill, and I went there as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed work experience student of about 18 years of age, and was called upon to provide sound effects on the Archers, which was in many ways still my greatest day ever. But I hope those Archers fans out there appreciate that one. I hope you can all hear me too. This is the first one of these that I've done, actually using this new technology and this virtual system that seems to be coming commonplace. So you've got the advantage of being able to say you were there for the first one, whereas perhaps not the advantages of perhaps a slicker presentation that might be further down the line after an extended run. Obviously, a very important part of preparation was organising my bookshelves so that it all looks intelligent and that I look like a credible figure. Hopefully they're sufficiently blurred in the background for you not to see that they're all science fiction and children's books. Anyway, I'm NHT's Head of Press and External Affairs, what I'm going to try and do over the next few minutes in this webinar is to give you a little bit more confidence about dealing with the media. And that to me falls in a couple of different parts. The first is obviously when you have unwanted interest from the media, actually, and I've got a couple of examples of what to do there if that happens. But of course, the rules are the same if you're trying to engage with the media for positive reasons, and there's some information that I'll be able to give you there as well. And as Andy said, I'd be delighted to take any questions at the end. Normally I run these sessions face to face and they're a bit more interactive, but to start with at least, we're going to just do a presentation so that you can hopefully get some good information this way. The sessions are supported by a couple of bits of guidance that I've produced and that will be shared with you afterwards, making the most of media opportunities and crisis communication. So we'll get on first with the crisis situations. And of course, the main thing to do when you find yourself in one of those situations is not to panic. Ultimately, you can only do your best. And remember, even though not all of you will be experts at this kind of thing, you can still get through it with some common sense and by following a few basic steps. And those golden rules I'll outline shortly. Now, one of the things that the kind of high watermark, if you like, of doing media interviews is the Today programme on Radio 4, which I'm sure a lot of you will know. I've just got a little clip here of our General Secretary, Paul Whiteman, speaking on the Today programme at the beginning of June. He's being interviewed by Nick Robinson. Nick Robinson, formidable interviewer, quite prone to interrupting. And so I just wanted to play you a little bit of this so you can hear how Paul did. And just maybe as you're listening, have a think about what kind of techniques he was employing, what he was trying to do. And we can discuss this at the end if you like, or if you have any questions. The other part of this, of course, is that I haven't done this presentation very often in this way. So it may just take a little minute while I cue up the audio, and I hope you can.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, the 10th of June. This is Today with schools in England might not fully reopen even after the long summer holiday. They're hailing the fact that Britain's zoos will reopen next week alongside shops selling non-essential items. So how about that most essential item of all, an education? How could it be restored? We're joined by the General Secretary of the Head Teachers Union, the NAHT, Paul Whiteman. Morning to you, Mr. Whiteman.
Good morning.
Before we talk about the practicalities of what you think is and is not possible, do you agree that it should be a source of national shame to everybody involved in this, that we have not found a way forward to educate young people?
Well, it's interesting that education gets to the top of the agenda in the middle of a pandemic and doesn't reach the top of the agenda in normal times. And if perhaps we spent as much time in normal times talking about education, we would have been able to respond in a more comprehensive way. There isn't a school.
Why so? What's the link between what you see as the neglect in the past and now?
Well, it's all about capacity, and against the backdrop of what we call the hierarchy of control to keep schools safe, there simply isn't the capacity in the system in terms of the numbers of teachers or the numbers of classrooms available to do more if observing those controls that the Department for Education are recommending. And that capacity has been eroded over time. We know that we've had for some time a crisis in recruitment of teachers and school leaders, and all of that pressure is being brought to bear now. But I think...
So there's two solutions, presumably, to this. There is deal with capacity, bring more staff in, perhaps the recently retired, perhaps volunteers for certain roles, increase the number of classrooms taking over gyms or other council facilities. Or you've got to say to the government, as some in the hospitality industry, I'll change the rules. So which, in your view, should it be?
Well, the furious debate that's taking place about what can happen very quickly is very interesting, and it's very reassuring that there's that level of interest. But you can't turn education capacity on and off like a tap, and therefore the decision yesterday from the Secretary of State is a sensible and pragmatic response to the capacity issues and the practical issues going forward. But now what we've got to get to is some sense of clarity about the government's planning assumptions and educational expectations when we begin the new year and use the new academic year and begin to plan for that. The real shame...
Well, when you say on and off like a tap, let me just pick that up, if I may. I mean, we first began the lockdown in March. We've had April, we've had May, June, July, August will come before September. It's hardly on and off like a tap, is it, to say, are there rooms in schools already, or perhaps in other council facilities, that can be reopened? Are you saying that's not possible?
Well, even if it is possible, it hasn't been planned until now because there hasn't been a clarity of expectation for school leaders to deal with and to plan for. And that's really
but
what
isn't
we've
this a
got
bit
to get
defeatist?
now.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Whiteman, but I mean, we talk to people who set up hospitals for 4,000 people in days. Why can you and your members who are head teachers not say, okay, mistakes have been made, you may blame ministers for the mistakes, but yes, we can now open classrooms, and yes, we can recruit some new staff. Is that not possible?
Well, your question assumes that nothing's been going on in the background, and actually school leaders and teachers have moved mountains in moments to make sure that children continue to be educated, either in school for those that are able to go there now, or from home right now. And they've completely rebuilt the education system from scratch in accordance to the directions and advice given from the Department for Education. Now, that changed yesterday in terms of the direction of travel, and what we need to do now is spend our time preparing for the longer term catch up that's going to be needed. So I think your question actually ignores the good work that's been going on already. Now, what school leaders now need going forward is the planning assumptions that government has, the science that government has, so that we can begin to discuss what to do with the rest of this term. But crucially, we're not going to catch children up over a very short period over the summer. This is going to be a longer term catch up that's going to be needed, and we need to plan that right now. We can't wait until September to deal with that. So in some sense,
and will that involve more online teaching? Because many children who are lucky enough to be sent to private schools do have full curriculum online, and of course there are many children who simply don't have either the broadband or the computers to do that in the population as a whole. But it's also been the case, hasn't it, that teacher unions have resisted that sort of online teaching.
Well, online teaching isn't the whole answer, and that's because of differentials in terms of access to online solutions and everything else. So school leaders and teachers have put together a mixed package of delivery for in-home and support in school, and we need to work on that further now to make sure that when we're looking at the catch-up and what we're doing throughout the next academic year, that can be delivered in the very best way possible. Now, the government has made promises about providing equipment. That's coming through slowly, unfortunately, but that is coming through, and we need to see that delivered so that rich mix of delivery can be the very best that it can. But I say again, the short-term solutions and the excitement around what can be done in the short term is very encouraging in terms of enthusiasm. But we need to use this moment now to plan for a much richer and deeper education beyond the summer. Remember, children don't have any more capacity to learn than they did before, and we can't overburden them.
Paul Wyman, head of the NAHT, thank you for joining us.
So there we go. That was Paul on the Today programme a few weeks ago, and I hope you'll agree that that was a pretty tough interview, and the interviewer was doing plenty of interrupting. But what Paul did really, really well there, I felt, was he kept his calm, he kept his cool, and his answers were very, very measured, and he spoke very, very clearly, and I think he got the position of our membership across really well, but also spoke to parents and families in words that were understandable for them too. So, just an example of kind of one of the tough ones that sometimes NAHT spokespeople have to deal with. It won't always be that tough, of course, but I just wanted to start off with some audio and to give you something to reflect on. Now, there are some golden rules when you're dealing with the media, and I just wanted to talk through a few of those for you. I mean, the first one to say is to ask for help, and that's why NHT employs me and the press team that we have. We're there to help you if you are trying to do anything at all in the media, and after this session you'll get some contact details for us, so that if you find yourself in a difficult spot and you need some help, we'd be only too happy to help you. And of course, if you want to use the media positively, either as a spokesperson for NHT or just as a spokesperson for your school to try and get better press for your school, contact us. We would be delighted to help you. When a call comes in from a journalist and they ring you and they say, we want a comment from you on this story or that story, the first thing to do actually is to stop. You're not under any obligation to give an instant quote to a journalist just because they've asked for one. And instead, the first thing to do really is to ask the journalist to email you with a request. And this will establish if their request is legitimate, and it'll give you a small amount of time to think. That's actually the approach that I take all the time in our press office at NAHT. It's worth making this approach part of your school's communication policy, actually, if you have one. It's certainly worth making sure that all staff understand that any media requests that come their way on the phone or by other means should be submitted to the head teacher or an agreed member of the leadership team via an email. Whilst you're waiting for that email to come through, you can use your time to think. Once the email arrives, you can decide if it's a legitimate request. On the phone, you've got no way of telling whether someone who says they're from the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph is actually where they're from. So an email is always a good way of making sure that you can verify that. Almost always, the initial call will come through your reception team, and that does place a bit of a burden on sometimes quite junior or inexperienced members of your team. This might be the first time you become aware of an issue. With that in mind, you should make sure that your reception team understand that they're not obliged to say anything immediately. And again, having some clear directions in your communications policy, or just in terms of how you would be a good thing to do there. If you're already in the process of communicating effectively with governors, trustees, your local community, your trust, parents, pupils and staff about the issue in question, you quite legitimately can take a view that maybe communicating through the media might not be necessary, although that's not always the case. So thinking time is really important. The first thing to do is to gather a couple of trusted colleagues to think through the situation you find yourself in. But think like a human, not like a robot. You might be speaking on behalf of your organisation, but the situation you're facing is always going to be about people. Every organisation that faces a kind of crisis situation will make a crisis comms plan. We do it at NAHT on behalf of members, and we've had to do it sometimes on behalf of the association too. So make a plan. Once you've had a think, plan what you want to do and put this in a document that's easy to refer to and share with everyone who'll need it. Put in as much detail as you feel that you need, a timeline, for example, and include any agreed statements that you might be sending to the public. Once you've made that plan, stick to it. In a crisis, there's really no room for improvisation. Mistakes happen when people are uncertain. You've taken the time to think it through, so put the plan into action as you've designed it. It's a good idea to schedule some moments for you and your trusted group of colleagues to come back together to review the situation, just to check that your plan is still sound. Now, depending on the nature of the scenario, that might be later in the day or later in the week, for example. But be confident. Most situations can be resolved satisfactorily if you act quickly. By the same token, delay and uncertainty almost always make matters worse. I'll come to a couple of examples about this in a minute. The plan gives you the confidence to move forward. You can act confidently then. And remember, people will be looking to you as school leaders for leadership and reassurance. And as hard as it might be and as uncertain as you might feel inside, it's important to give that to everyone. How you behave, in fact, is almost as important as what you say. Communication, very, very important. Most situations deteriorate when there is uncertainty or inconsistency around. So make sure you're in touch with all the people who need to know what's going on. Think about the order you need to talk to people in and whether everyone needs every bit of information that you have. That's not the same as telling people different things. You should definitely avoid that. But your team should agree on what needs to be said and then share this information appropriately. If you want to, you can contact us in the press team. It may be that you need to share the information with governors, your local authority or your trust, your team, parents and carers, pupils, the media, but only if you feel that will help you. Have some clear boundaries about who can share the information and who can't. Back to the idea at the beginning here of your receptionist perhaps being very clear about what they're able to say or not. It's best if the agreed group of spokespeople is small, and give the agreed statement to everyone who can speak on behalf of the school, and instruct everyone else to refer to you before going further. Those are some golden rules. And the last three there, the three don'ts. Don't blame at this stage. Almost certainly a mistake will have been made somewhere, but it could have been an honest one, and the person involved will probably already be in quite a state about it. So you may also need that person at the races as part of your reaction to the crisis. So providing support may be necessary whilst you still need them to function. Aside from any action you might need to take immediately on safeguarding grounds, for example, now would be the time to enact the plan that you've made. In all but the most serious cases, sanctions can wait. Don't dodge. If you're in a crisis communication situation, however mild, it's almost certainly because something has not gone according to plan. It's never wise to pretend that there's nothing to see here, or hoping that the situation will blow over. That kind of ostrich mentality just doesn't work. And I'm sure we've all seen examples of organisations that have not behaved appropriately and have suffered as a result in a crisis situation. I mean, sometimes even the most awful situations can be prevented from escalating with a quick and sincere statement. I've got a lovely video coming up which summarises all this in a minute or two. Parents in particular, always very key. When the school's faced with a difficult scenario, they mainly just want to know that you have a plan and that they can depend on you to be honest and humane and sensible. So do think about how you would feel in their place, and don't panic. You know, these are some golden rules, there's some suggestions, but there's no magic formula. Actually, things can go wrong even with a great plan in place and a calm head on your shoulders. And the important thing is to remember that in all but the most exceptional circumstances, your school will be open tomorrow, and you will still need everyone in your school family to behave sensibly and respectfully towards one another. Kind of keep that in mind when you speak to everyone. In the guidance that I'm referring to here, there is a draft action plan that you could put into place. So here are a couple of slides that show some questions that are worth asking yourself when you bring your little select team together to deal with your crisis situation. So I think safety, obviously, very, very important. So if anyone is in danger because of something you, your team have done or not done, have you or the school done anything wrong? Have you got anything actually to apologise for? Would an immediate apology be best? Should you take any legal advice? Does the situation require or arise from a pupil exclusion or staff suspension? Those issues, from a media point of view, are always particularly noteworthy and have the whiff of scandal about them, which clearly attracts journalists in many ways. Some other questions. Who should speak on behalf of the school? It doesn't always have to be you as the head teacher. Is it really a matter that the school should be commenting on, is another question to ask. Sometimes former pupils might be getting themselves in hot water, particularly if they're famous. I've had a couple of those examples to deal with in the past. They, in all but the rarest circumstances, their activity since they left your school a long time ago is of no consequence to you, and you shouldn't necessarily be drawn into that. There may be some behaviour of theirs that does need to be condemned, of course, but that's a different matter. Sequencing, as I'd said, do you need to communicate with staff, parents or others first before you do something in the media? What information are you allowed to share and what needs to remain private? That's a consideration you have around safeguarding, of course. What's the worst thing that can happen? And does what you do now have an impact on anything else in a day, a week, or a month's time? Now, crisis communication took on a new nadir or zenith, depending on your point of view, around the Dominic Cummings scandal of a few weeks ago. If you remember, the Daily Mirror and the Guardian very cleverly revealed part of the story on one day and forced a statement from the government, and then revealed even more details the following day. And one of the things that I tend to ask school leaders who come to me for advice is there anything else? Is there anything you haven't told me? Because so it's worth asking yourselves that question in your trusted group at the planning stage, because what you do immediately needs to be taken in a way that you're in full possession of the facts of the situation. Here's an example which I hope you can see okay. This is a story, a crisis communications classic, if you like, from a couple of weeks ago, last week in fact, involving Sevenoaks School, which is a very elite and expensive independent school in the southeast of England, not too far away from where I live actually. And they were accused in The Guardian, in a very high profile piece, of upgrading the grade predictions of their students on UCAS forms in order to get them preferential treatment into universities. Now, regardless of what you think of the independent sector or this particular issue, I do think that this is an interesting one to look at. Some documentation that enabled them to show Sevenoaks themselves were in a very, because it was very, very high profile, but they will have had to communicate with parents as well. They will have done all of the things that I've just been talking about. So within this story, Sevenoaks provided a statement. Here's that statement. We're confident in the integrity of our processes and refute any suggestion that we would unfairly exaggerate UCAS predictions. All UCAS predicted grades are based on what is realistic and achievable for pupils, in line with UCAS's guidelines, which make clear that predicted grades should be aspirational but achievable. A significant majority of Sevenoaks students meet or exceed their UCAS predicted grades, and in this respect, we significantly outperform the national average. The school's successful record in relation to university entries is clear evidence that its predicted grades processes are effective and justified. Of our leavers in 2019, 96.5% met or exceeded the conditions of their university offer. So a staunch defence from Sevenoaks there, because they recognised that that was probably the only thing they could say. I think that statement pretty good, a little bit long for my money. And we'll come on to that in more detail. But what's so interesting is that they also communicated to parents. Here's part of the parental letter that went out. And you can see in the highlighted sections here, we're confident in the integrity of our processes and refute any suggestion that we would unfairly exaggerate UCAS predictions. What they're doing there is making sure that they're saying the same things to one group of people as they are to others, and that consistency is really, really important. They're saying it in a different way. The letter actually was quite long, but that's a good thing that they did. You take your own view on whether they handled this well or badly, you know, but I think the important thing to note is that they did follow some very clear steps here, and they did share the same information with the press as they did with their parents, and there was continuity between the two. Don't forget, of course, if you do send a letter to parents, that may as well be your statement to the wider world. As soon as a parent has it, it's in the public domain. It could be used and shared by journalists. There are some common mistakes, and here's 3, and I'll just quickly take you through them. Now, in a crisis comms situation, thinking about your reputation is normal, but don't think about how you protect your reputation or the reputation of your institution. The best way of maintaining it in the long term is by doing the right thing in the immediate term and let others judge. Now, quite often when the press come to you, they'll say, oh, this is your chance to set the record straight, or this is your chance to have a right of reply. Now, when journalists put stories out there about your school or you, they are obliged to give you a right of reply. It's up to you whether you take it or not, and you might not always, but a right of reply is certainly an option that they have to give you before publishing. That certainly doesn't always set the record straight. It usually won't. So I wouldn't necessarily believe that as a pitch from a journalist who is approaching you. The main thing to consider is that you don't have to persuade the journalist that you are right. In this situation, your aim is just to get the message across. And that is actually what Sevenoaks did there in that case. They weren't bothered about proving themselves right or winning an argument. They just had to get their message across as clearly as they could. And I think they did that, actually. Some do's and don'ts for you. And again, you can take your own view about whether any of the media stories that you see generally with people talking about crisis situations or interviews more generally follow any of these rules. Being clear and unambiguous. Using everyday language and avoiding sounding too corporate. Bit of corporate language in the Sevenoaks example, but there it is. Thinking like a parent. I think they were mindful of what parents thought in that letter. Addressing the issue directly. That's about not dodging it. And they didn't dodge it, actually. Stopping talking or writing when you've made your point. Like I was saying earlier, the letter was a couple of pages long. The statement was 3 or 4 paragraphs long. You might choose to make that very much shorter, because the fewer words you offer, the fewer interpretations of those words a journalist can put on what you've sent them. Remember, a journalist wants a scoop, not your friendship. Doesn't matter how affable or kind they seem. And stick to the messages and examples you prepared and rehearsed. So if you've taken the trouble to put together a statement or a letter, use it. Don't start riffing off it and adding in extra bits. That's that improvisation that I talked about that could get you into difficulty. Some don'ts. Don't use 5 sentences when 2 will do. Don't use jargon or hide behind regulations. There's a bit of jargon in the Sevenoaks example, and also they were hiding behind some regulations to an extent, but you know, you do what you can with what you've got. Don't criticize parents, ever. If you happen to find yourself in a story about a brawl in your playground or some antisocial behavior by parents, you might well feel like criticizing them, actually, but you need to find another way of articulating the same thing. And it's better to talk about the expectations that you have of behavior rather than talking about the negative behavior that you've seen. It's interesting. I often have taken advice about not repeating the slur or allegation that's been made against you. Now, Sevenoaks did do that, but if the allegation is that there has been a fight broken out in your playground, for example, or whatever it might be, you don't need to retread that in what you say in your statement necessarily. It'll appear somewhere else. But the advantage to you of not putting it in your own words is that then it won't appear in your own words in any article about you. It's a good idea not to name the school or the institution in your own statement if you can avoid it. Although I appreciate that might not always be possible. It may be that the crisis you're in relates to other organisations or something that they have done. You don't talk about them in your statement, just you do you. You refer to your situation and leave other organisations to talk about themselves. And don't, as I said, deviate from what you've agreed to say publicly. Don't add more at any given time. Here's some examples of the sorts of things where you might find yourself having to deal with a crisis situation. The important thing I would suggest is that, here's an idea. This kind of webinar is all very well. When I do these sessions face-to-face, they're a lot more interactive and people are able to talk about their own experiences. And I bet you, everybody listening right now, will have faced some scenario or other. And actually just hearing from other people about those scenarios and how you escaped and how you managed to get through it, even though it was pretty grim at the time, is always very, very valuable. So if you've got local connections, make those local connections with other heads and other school leaders and see what expertise locally you can draw on. And also have a crisis comms chat in a leadership meeting or something, so that some of this stuff isn't being taken off the shelf without you having seen it. So the documents that I've produced, you know, have those on file and share them with your leadership team if you'd like to. Now, how to deliver a meaningful apology. Great video here from a company that we use sometimes called Electric Airwaves, and I'll just play this for you now because it's a great summary of what I've said, but it's only a minute long, which is a lot shorter than I've managed so far. So they've got a lot of videos on their website, and again, I can give you all of this information afterwards because this is all free to access actually. So if you're interested in hearing it, then you can use all of these videos. And here's this one.
How can you apologize and sound like you really mean it? All too often, apologies strike the wrong tone. For example, I'm sorry if I've offended anyone. This sounds more like, I'm sorry that you're so stupid or so sensitive, you get offended. The rules for an effective apology are, be swift, so it doesn't seem like it's being dragged out of you. It also shows that you know the difference between right and wrong. Be sincere. Your audience will always know if you're not being genuine, and that won't be helped if you read your apology from a piece of paper. Be succinct. Trying to explain or qualify your apology reduces its effectiveness. And finally, say what you're going to do to fix the problem. A sincere apology should express regret, remorse, and repentance. We could do a lot worse than remember the wise words of our parents. Say you're sorry and mean it.
So there we go. That's Andrew, who runs Electric Airwaves, who we've used before. Now, I'm conscious of time. I've rattled on for quite a long time, and it's only just coming up to 1 o'clock now. So I'll stop there. And if there's any questions or anything anybody would like to pitch at me in the last minute or two, I'd be very, very grateful to hear any of those. Of course, you can contact us afterwards as well. If you need anything. So Andy, I don't know whether you've got anything for me. I can see one in the chat. So
yeah, I was just probably on to check that you could see the question, and B, if you couldn't, I was going to read it out to you, but you can see it yourself. It's a really good question. Can we provide a media comms policy for people, or if not, actually sit down and write their policy for them? Is there a model that we can adapt and use? I get where that question's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's common, isn't it? I mean, as you said at the beginning, Andy, you know, one of the things that I also do is I'm a chair of governors at primary school, and I wrote our school's communication policy. So I'd be very, very happy to take that one off the shelf, actually, and share it around this group. You can take your own view then when you see it about whether you think it's any good or not. But I'd be delighted to share that. Of course, I would. We found that it served us pretty well. And it does include some sections about communicating with the press too. So I'll send that to, I'll dig that out and I'll make sure that that's something that's shared as well.
Great, and someone else at the top, as they always do, and whether we'll be sharing the slides around with people. And of course, yes, we will be doing that. And hopefully if the recording comes out fine, we'll send the recording of the Zoom session to everyone who's attended today. So you'll get a media comms policy when Stephen's written it. But also we'll send around the slides with some really helpful do's and don'ts. Just while we're waiting for questions to come in, I really like your presentation, Stephen. Obviously, I've been in that position myself, not as a teacher, but in different walks of life. The advice to stop first, I think, is really important. I've been there where you've had a journalist on the phone. You think, oh God, what do I do now? And you're right. The first advice is don't panic, stop. Take your time, think about what you say, don't blurt out an answer there and then to be helpful. So I think that was really helpful advice. And the other thing I noticed, which I heard Paul doing in the clip that you helpfully played, was not to take journalist questions at face value. There was, I can't remember what the question was, but Paul very gently questioned the basis that the question had been put to him. He didn't just accept it, you know. all schools are pink. No, I don't actually accept that all schools are pink. I think you'll find that they're blue and grey and orange as well. I think it was a really useful reminder that just because a journalist has asked you a question doesn't mean you've got to confine yourself to answering exactly in the terms it was put.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's a really important thing to do. You can reject the premise of the question if you like. It takes some skill and some thought to do that, but actually that kind of approach, it works well if you have been able to think. If you've taken the time to think about what you might be asked, for example, before you answer the questions, which is why that little buffer that I recommended at the beginning is so important. You can say, well, actually, you're not asking me the right question yet, or you've got the wrong end of the stick. And as long as you can back that up, and usually you can, then it's an approach that is certainly worth considering.
Okay, I'm just waiting to see if are there any other questions? Here we go. I like this one. Would you advise just stopping speaking, even if mid-sentence, if you feel you're moving off the agreed statement? Oh God, we've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah. Well,
my old school teacher used to say, every time I open my mouth, some fool speaks, and it's that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't put it anywhere in the presentation, but perhaps I should. The biggest golden rule is you are in control of your mouth. No one is controlling that for you. And so if you do feel yourself swaying or straying, then you can stop. Just stop, even if it's just to take a breath, a beat, and then come back to your script or what you wanted to say. Interviewers do that time and again. Interviewees do that time and again, and it's definitely something to watch out for. A way to avoid that happening in the first place is to have something written down at your side. If you're doing a radio interview, for example, you can have it because people see you. And if you're doing something like this where you're on camera, you will have seen that most of what I've been saying to you today has been written down already. Actually, you'll recognise it when you see the document. So, excuse me, if you've got it written, you're much less likely to stray if you find yourself in a live situation.
It's really good advice, isn't it? Especially if you're on radio, 2 seconds, 3 seconds of silence on radio does sound like an eternity. So if you've got something ready and back up that you can look at and refer to, that's going to help if you feel stuck in there. So thanks, that's a really great question. Following on from that, someone's asked me a similar thing. Thanks for sharing the clip, Paul. Yes, indeed. Would be really useful to hear how to handle a combative interviewer. Well, I think Paul gave a little bit of a masterclass in how to do that. Nick Robinson's interesting. He is combative in his own special little way. You don't sort of notice really quite when he's sticking the stiletto in your back.
Yeah,
are there
there's a couple of things.
Any other top tips you give, Stephen?
Well, here's another thing that you might face. You might find yourself thrown by a combative interviewer, but equally you might find yourself thrown by an interviewer who doesn't have a grasp of the facts. Let's face it, your expertise is an inch wide and a mile deep because you are an expert in what you do, whereas a journalist is moving to the next. They have a wide range of knowledge that is an inch deep. And as a result, you might find yourself being asked a really rubbish question or a question that isn't actually getting to the heart of the matter. And that can be stabilizing, a combative question. And so the advice I would give really is, Paul in that interview was very clear about what he wanted to say. He wasn't trying to convince Nick Robinson of anything at all. He was just trying to get across a statement that he wanted to, and he did that. And if you can do that, it doesn't matter how aggressive you are necessarily. If you can keep calm, your calmness is derived from preparing what you want to say before you go on.
Okay, great. Got another couple of questions. Again, I'll just carry on reading them out if that helps and everyone can hear them at the same time. An anonymous attendee says, our Chair of Governance made a statement to the press without consultation. Do I have the authority to ask him to consult with me before doing this?
Of course you do. Of course you do. Leadership and management, when your school is judged, is one determination, isn't it? Everything we know about how chairs of governments and leaders are supposed to work together is collaboration. And I certainly wouldn't like to see chairs of governments making statements that they haven't at least briefed you on beforehand. Because let's face it, they might be talking about something that is an operational matter, which is clearly your domain and not theirs. So it really is very, very important that you and your chair of governments are one when communicating. The fact is that sometimes in a crisis situation, it would be your chair of governors and not you who has to make the statement on the school's behalf. So really very important that your chair of governors pays attention to that. There's a guidance document that we produced with NGA that talks about what school leaders should expect from governors and vice versa. And in that, it's very clear that collaborative approach is the best one to take.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got one more question from Rob Fleet, which sort of follows up on the point I was saying about don't take a question at face value, or don't, just because you've asked it, feel that the question has a basis in truth and you have to respond to everything that it says. Rob's asking, when faced with a loaded question based on a false assumption, is it a good idea to point out to the interviewer that is what the question is? So is it, paraphrasing that, is it good to call your interviewer a liar, I suppose is the question, isn't it?
Well, look, it's not a good idea to go at it like that, but think about it this way. You as a school leader are one of the elders of your community. You don't be older because you're one of the people that commands the most respect in the area where you live and work. More often than not, you will have way more information and knowledge about the situation that you're being asked about and about any interview will ever have. Therefore, you have a bedrock of expertise and credibility to draw on. It is your absolute right to set interviewers straight if they're asking you a dumb, loaded, or inaccurate question. But you just have to do it calmly, as your audience would expect you to. You guys have got way more expertise in this field than perhaps you even realise, because you deal with these kinds of situations and these interactions with parents and other people in your community the whole time. Use that same suit of armour that you wear when you're dealing with difficult questions from other people in your community to serve you if you're doing media interviews.
Great. Yes, very much agree with that, Stephen. I'm looking to see if we've got any other questions. I haven't got any others written down or anything coming through the chat, and I'm conscious that time is marching on. If people do want to type in a question as we're going on, please continue to do so. We've got Stephen booked to reappear, same channel, different time at 5:30 today. So if you missed him, there's still some, I think there's still some spaces left at 5:30 if you want to catch this again, or if you want to encourage friends and family to do so, feel free to do that. There's, as you can see, a poll in front of you. So if you would be so kind to have a look at the poll, fill in the questions as we go along, it's really helpful for us. Particularly because it's really helpful to know if people are happy to act as spokespeople for the wider NHT community, because there's a plethora of really intelligent, bright, sharp people out there who are really good at handling media and will be even better following the training. And if you're happy to be a spokesman for the community and doing that, please volunteer your services, and we'll happily get in touch with you on how to say that forward. Also, the poll is really helpful to us in learning how you found the training and what we can provide for you in the future. If you've got any feedback for us about the session or would like to know more, please email us at events@naht.org.uk. If you'd like to know more about NAHT, I think everybody on this chat is a member, but if you'd like to encourage more people to become members, there's an offer at the moment of a £30 John Lewis voucher for you, and for up to 5 people also get the voucher if you encourage them to join, so feel free to take advantage of that. If we can offer you any tailored training, please contact us either at events@naht.org.uk or tailoredtraining@naht.org.uk. And just to say, we've been running these sessions for about 4 or 5 weeks now. we're really happy with how they're going and the take up that we're getting on and the feedback we're getting from people. We've got one next week from ESP, who are education consultants. We're going to offer some training on resilience. We're then hoping to have a further session on wellness and protect, from wellness and protect on well-being, which is increasingly important in this day and age. And we've got Professor Barry Carpenter back on the 14th of July, talking about the recovery curriculum. Barry's spoken to us before, and that went down really well and booked out quite fast. So if you're interested, all the details are on our website. And there are events on Pathway as well. David Gumbel, the author of Lift, Going Up If Teaching Gets You Down, is speaking on the 8th of July. And on the 21st of July, we've got Max Coates in conversation with Andrew Hammond. So again, look on the website, all the details there, how to log into that. So feel free to take advantage of that. I'm just checking through the chat. Thank you for your thanks. Some helpful feedback about Signal, but I think we broadly got there. I don't think there's been any comments about the books behind Stephen's head, so that's good. No one's mentioned the Archers, so we've got away with that, so that's good. So I think all it remains is to thank you, Stephen, for your time, and thank you to all the panelists for your questions and your participation. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, it's a pleasure. I'm back again at 5:30. Okay, thank you, everyone.